Hey everyone, it is Michael Zapersky here, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I am very excited to have another Michael in the virtual building, but it is Michael Bach. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be here.
So, Michael, you are a consultant in the fields of diversity, inclusion, and equity. You're the founder and CEO of CCDI Consulting, which you've been running since, I believe, January of 2013. We'll talk about other stuff that you have going on, but you were previously self-employed. You've also held positions at KPMG, which I'm sure many people will be familiar with. Uh, Today, I want to get into your story, have you share some lessons learned, how you got to where you are, how you've created a successful consulting business. Before I do that, let's go back in time a little bit. I'd love if you could share a bit about your kind of educational background and what you were doing before you got into the world of consulting.
Sure. So that's a complicated question. I actually went to university for fine arts performance because I was going to be an actor. Didn't necessarily work out. But at the same time, I had also actually done, while I was in high school, I had done a college diploma in computer sciences. So I was a bit of a savant as a young person and ended up spending a lot of my career working in the IT profession, which was a burgeoning field, and this is admittedly 30 years ago. Lots of change happening pretty rapidly. And I found myself working at KPMG in the IT consulting practice. I had come from my own consulting shop. I had an independent consultant and moved into KPMG. And it was while at KPMG that there was an opportunity, long story short, to write a business case for the creation of a job in diversity and inclusion. And I thought that's a job I want, because I'd always done this work, diversity and inclusion work, but no one was paying me for it. I would volunteer with different organizations, different LGBTQ2 plus organizations, with women's organizations, newcomer organizations, but it wasn't a job, or at least it wasn't a job that I was willing to accept that pay.
Right.
And then I had this opportunity to create this role, and it was an internal facing role, so not a consultant. And I led diversity at the firm for 7 years. I grew the team to 4 people, really put the firm on the map. I was also the deputy chief diversity officer globally for the firm for a couple of years. And then in 2011, 12, I started to noodle with the idea of what would what would an organization look like that was supporting employers around diversity and inclusion. And originally I was thinking for profit.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up starting a non-profit called the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. And at the same time, we started building a consulting practice, which was housed in a different legal entity.
Right.
So we had
And
CCDI
I do
and
want to dig
CCI
into that.
Consulting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really want to dig into that. And I also want to explore further the work that you're actually doing and how other companies and consultants can learn or at least get your perspectives and what you're seeing in the marketplace. But take me back to those days at KPMG, because
Sure.
before you got into working at a large corporate, you had your own kind of solo consulting business. Then you went to KPMG. You were there for many years. Then you went off and did your own, again, consulting and nonprofit. When you look back at your years at KPMG, working at such a well-known, well-established firm with lots of systems and people and resources, what, if anything, stands out, or what do you take away from that you were able to implement into your next round of business and ventures? Were there any lessons that really kind of stuck with you or are still with you today?
Yeah, sure. So, there's pros and cons to working with a big organization like a KPMG. I think the things that I took away from that was a lot around process and formality. And so the practice I'm running today has a bit of a heavy hand about process and formality and making sure, we know how to get things done, and that it's not kind of all over the place. It takes away some of that entrepreneurial adventurism, the, hey, I've got an idea, let's put it together and, hammer it out to our clients with a half hour's notice.
Right.
And well, I think, obviously at KPMG, there's good reason why there needs to be that formality and all the process. But I think there's a lot you can learn from that in a small organization, because it means that everyone's kind of singing from the same songbook. Everyone understands how things are done. There isn't confusion in how things are done, and you can train people more easily. I would say that's sort of the biggest thing that I took away from it.
Yeah.
Was sort of, how can I take what we had at KPMG and understanding they're a highly regulated profession, so there's a lot of pieces that we didn't have to pay attention to.
Sure.
But at the same time, learn from all of the good things that they do.
What's one system or one process that you brought over from your years of experience at KPMG when you kind of restarted your next venture in the world of consulting? Is there one specific system or one specific process that you thought, yeah, we definitely need to bring this in, like this is really critical for our success?
The thing that immediately comes to mind is the silliest thing, but it's file naming structures. And I realize that probably sounds silly, but the firm had a way of naming files so that you could find them really easily.
Yeah. And
so we implemented it at CCDI Consulting, and it's as simple as like the date of the file, or the date that you make the file goes into the file name, but it goes in year, month, day, so it sorts by the date. Yeah. And then the client name, and then the project or engagement name, and then the folder structure as part of that. And it's the silliest thing, but I know that if I'm looking for a file on a client, I go to the client's directory, I go to the letter of the alphabet, I go to their folder, one projects, and there it'll be. And it reduces the chaos, particularly once you're beyond, your entrepreneurs, your single shingle independent contractor.
Yeah.
Once you start to hire people, there has to be a way to pass that information on, and it has to be simple, and it works.
No, I think that's a great example, because even for the solo consultants that are taking this in and joining us right now, think about how much time you spend looking for files or things that you created. And I think that's really what you're getting at, is that if you can spend less time looking for things, and especially when that kind of compounds as you have more team members, that just creates a lot more efficiency. And it's, again, especially when you have more people than just yourself, that is profitability, right? That's if it's time wasted. So yeah, really great example. I'd love then to dig into, you founded the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, which I think you mentioned now is a nonprofit, but it seems very directly connected to that is CCDI Consulting, which is the consulting for-profit arm, I believe. Can you explain just for us, because I want to kind of dive deeper into both of these, what is the structure of each, and what is the connection? How do they work together or not together?
Yeah, so Canadian tax law is such that there's certain ways you have to do things. In our case, when we set up CCDI is a registered charity. In the US, it'd be called a 501c3. There's other names for it around the world.
Right.
And as a consequence, there's only a certain amount of revenue that can be received from what they deem to be for-profit activities.
Okay.
Namely consulting.
Right.
And when we started up consulting, we thought that it would be about 10% of our revenue. It wasn't going to be a big piece of our work. It was going to be stuff we did on the side of our desk.
Right.
Yeah, I was so wrong about that. Epically wrong. And very quickly, we realized that it was going to be much more than 10%. So we set up a separate legal entity that is majority owned by the charity. So the charity can actually own another corporation. And all of the consulting work then is done through CCDI Consulting, which is the separate legal entity. There's still that relationship. They are a sister organization. Mm-hmm. For a long time, we ran the organizations pretty much as one. But again, the consulting arm got so big that we've very much had to spin it off and completely separated it. So now we have separate websites, separate domains, separate people, everything. And they are run completely independent of the other. But still, we are, one of the purposes of CCDI Consulting is to generate income for the charity. And that's what we do.
And why start the nonprofit? Why not just go right into creating a consulting business? You can still affect and support change and, so why the nonprofit? I'd love to kind of know your thinking around those two.
Yeah. So when I sort of, on the back of a napkin in an airport bar, wrote down what I wanted this organization to be, mm-hmm. there were a lot of activities that were not going to make money. Mm. And it was stressing me out. And I was thinking, how can we do this? How can we do this? And the other piece of the puzzle is that there is a belief that the work of diversity and inclusion should be in the nonprofit space. If it's consulting, true consulting, then people are fine with it being a for-profit. But we were doing things like community of practice events and webinars and educational offerings that had the appearance of being more on that philanthropic nonprofit side. Mm-hmm. And so there was a general sense that this really had to be in the nonprofit space. And I remember distinctly, I was trying to figure out how to do it. It was my idea. I wanted to own it. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, I can just do this as a nonprofit. Mm. And it meant I was giving up my ownership, which was fine. I could live with that, but it served kind of the higher purpose, not to be too Pollyanna about it. And it was exactly the right way to do it. Largely now because we've spun off consulting into its own separate, and separate brand and separate identity. The one thing I would have done from the start is do that so that it was a separately run entity completely from day one. But otherwise, CCDI is a very prominent player in the diversity and inclusion space in Canada, and they kind of own the Canadian market. Mm-hmm. Our work in consulting is much more global. We work with clients in the US and the UK and all over the world. Right. And we needed to sort of have that separation in order to achieve it. So I'm not someone who's terribly motivated by money. Mm-hmm. I was more interested in having a bigger picture impact on the workplaces in Canada, and that's why I went with a nonprofit.
And do you feel that the nonprofit is able to create a greater impact than, say, if you were just a straight, consulting business, in the sense of not having the nonprofit component to it? Like, just how do you think about those two?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the charity has a specific mandate around educating Canadians about the value of diversity and inclusion. Mm. And they're able to do things that they're just not going to make any money. Like, we came up with a designation similar to an HR designation, a supply chain designation called the CCIP, the Canadian Certified Inclusion Practitioner. And it never makes money. It loses money. Right. But it was created to credentialize the profession of diversity and inclusion, which is a growing profession in Canada. Right. And it needed some credentialization behind it. So we couldn't look at it as a money maker. We sort of said, this is something we're doing for the greater good. In a for-profit, we would have jettisoned it long ago, because it just wasn't going to make coin.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the consulting side, if I'd set it up solely as a consulting practice, there were a lot of things that I wouldn't have done.
Right. You have a bunch of very well-known companies like SAP, Accenture, Deloitte, recognized universities, HSBC, that are listed as founding partners. Uh, and I believe that is on the nonprofit side.
It is,
But I'd love to know, like, what does that mean? What is a founding partner, and is there strategy behind that? Like, in creating these relationships, there's the support to the nonprofit, but was there also strategic thinking on your part in terms of the connection to the consulting side and the for-profit business?
Oh, Michael, you give me way too much credit. So it's important that listeners understand that the charity is funded by employers who pay an annual sponsorship fee, and then they're able to attend webinars and in-person events. That's their funding model. And so they have what are called employer partners. And in the case you're talking about, the founding employer partners. And I'd love to tell you that there was something strategic behind them. They were the first 25 employers that signed on the dotted line. That was the deal. The first 25 would be the founding employer partners. And I think they're down to about 20 now. I think 5 have dropped out. And if you stop being an employer partner, you lose the founding status and you can't get it back.
Okay.
The reality is that when we started the organization, my expectation is it was only going to be the big players. SAP, HSBC, Shell, big global companies that were going to be interested in and able to write a check for the right to participate in this organization. In the past couple of years, that's changed very dramatically. Where a lot of really small employers, employers with like 50 people,
right,
have written a check for a few $1,000 in order to gain access to the educational opportunities. And it's just been a bit of a free-for-all. Right. I mean, George Floyd's death in May of 2020, changed everything. And it has worked in the organization's favor. I wouldn't say that there has been much in the way of a real strategic approach. We are, truthfully, just now, 9 years in business, we are now starting to do proactive sales.
Right.
So actually doing outbound sales. Up until now, it's all been inbound.
And is that for the nonprofit or for the for-profit, or both?
Both.
Okay.
It's just about answer the phone. And what we found, we got to a particular size, and particularly this is more on the consulting side. On the charitable side, they're still getting requests.
What is the team makeup? I think I saw about 42 people or so on the team. So what's the count of people on both sides of the organizations?
Yeah, so the charity has, I think, about 20 now.
Okay. And
consulting has about 45.
Okay.
And the charity just kind of hums along now. And the employers reach out, they join, it's good.
Right.
Consulting, because we got to this size, the sort of almost 50 people, we needed to make sure that pipeline of revenue was strong every month without fail, because we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in payroll every month,
right? And
it's not like we can miss that.
Sure, yeah.
So we now have to start doing proactive outreach. Frankly, the things that our competitors have been doing all along, and we now have to start doing it. And that's largely because we have one thing that our competitors don't have, and that's most of our team are former D&I people from inside large organizations. Myself at KPMG, we've got Scotiabank, we've had Xerox, we've had all sorts of organizations. And so there's a credibility that comes with that. And I think credibility is really important as a consultant, that when I'm giving you advice, when I'm saying, here's how you should collect demographic data on your people, it's not because I read a book, it's because I did it at KPMG. Right. Yeah. And that helps to differentiate us, but it also means that our competitors have been out there selling, and now we're playing catch up on proactive outbound sales.
Can you give me a little bit more detail on what that kind of go-to market strategy or sales strategy now looks like, especially as you mentioned, you're playing catch up. So is this sending emails? Is it making phone calls? Is it doing both? Is it reactivating your network? Just at a high level to begin with, like, what does the typical playbook look like for your team right now to build a pipeline and generate new opportunities in sales?
That's a great question, Michael, and the answer is all of the above. So it is taking advantage of our current clients and doing proactive outreach to them, not only just to sell something. I don't follow the philosophy of every call has to produce a sale. Right. It's about building relationships and really entrenching us as the go-to. Nothing frustrates me more when I hear a client has used a service from a competitor that we provide. It just right. So I want to be the only company that they call. So entrenching ourselves there, looking at previous engagements, the type of work we've done with clients, and then trying to sell them something more along that line. So if they've done unconscious bias training, what about doing training on managing bias in the hiring process? And looking for those connected opportunities as opposed to randomly saying, hey, have you thought about this?
Right.
It's about...
Sorry to interrupt, Michael, but is that done through initially an email outreach and saying, hey, want to share with you some ideas or some additional training? How are you positioning that? Because I think a lot of people are in a situation where, they have existing or past clients, and those clients may not actually know about everything that they can offer. So I'd love a little bit more detail on the positioning of those offers.
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes out in a number of fashions. Email is part of it, but understanding that for every email I send, the person's receiving 1,000 others, and it's not necessarily the most effective means of communications. Email's part of it. We have a monthly newsletter, has several thousand people on it, so making sure we're pushing it out through that. It's also just picking up the phone. We have a sales team of 5 people, right. And they all have a cohort of clients that they're responsible for, and we're in the process of hiring a few net new sales roles. That will be more on the hunter versus gatherer type approach. Right. So they're just picking up the phone, they're booking meetings, talking about the client's needs. It's time, which is really hard for an independent consultant, but we have the advantage of having a larger team. It's also social media. It's a big part of what we do, is being out there and positioning ourselves as thought leaders. And that's not just through social media, it's also through creating thought leadership pieces. It's through putting on our own webinars that are just informational and available to anybody. But they have a sales angle to them, right? Unlike the charity, which is just about education, ours is about selling a service. So if we do a webinar on data collection, leading practices in data collection, we're going to talk about our service in data collection. So all of those pieces of the puzzle are really important. Right. Ideally, you're going to have a person whose sole job it is to just go and have those conversations and build that relationship. And it's certainly a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, so you're now getting closer to 50 team members in the consulting business. How has your role changed, Michael? If you look at, from the inception of the business to where you are today, and kind of think about chapters throughout the progression of the business, what would you label those chapters? Like, what does that look like for you, and how has your role changed as you've gone through each of those chapters?
Sure. So at the beginning, chef, cook, and bottle washer. Yeah. I came from an organization of like 6,000 people in Canada, and I suddenly realized that when I went to pick up the phone and call the IT department, that it was my phone that was going to ring because I was the IT department. I was the marketing department. I was HR. I was everything. So at the beginning, we did everything. Everyone did everything. We had no job descriptions. It was do whatever we need to do in order to grow the organization so we can hire another person to offload some of the work. Relatively quickly, we got to the point where we could start to have specific jobs.
Right.
And as the consequence, I started to be able to hand off pieces of my work. So IT, we suddenly had an IT manager, and then we had a communications manager who would handle the social media, and so on and so forth. So slowly but surely, I got to hand pieces off. Over the past few years, I would say that my role is very much the chameleon. So I am somebody who has a lot of different skills, and I know, sort of a little about a lot. I'm however that saying goes, which is good because I can basically step into any area of the business and figure it out.
Were you at the early stages doing a lot more of the delivery and engagement work?
Oh, everything. Everything. I was doing the sales, I was doing the delivery, it was in all hands.
Did you ever experience clients, or maybe even your own mindset, that clients wanted you? They wanted your expertise.
Oh, yes.
You were the thought leader.
Oh, yes.
How did you make that transition? Or how did you go about removing yourself from the delivery so that you could work more on the marketing or the hiring or the strategy, or working on the business as opposed to working in the business?
Yeah, so it's sort of how the job progressed. What I ended up doing was kind of moving where I was needed. Well, I still was getting a lot of demand for me to do the work.
Right.
But like in 2018, long story, we hit a bad financial patch. And so I just moved into sales. And I spent all of my time in sales with the sales team of, I think there were 3 of us at the time. And we managed to blow the numbers out of the water because I'm good at sales. And the clients were happy to talk with the CEO, and, it worked. Now I'm getting back more into delivery. And here's why. What we've realized over the past couple of years is that one of our key subject matter experts was doing administrative work, looking at the finance, looking at, policies and procedures. But I'm a subject matter expert in diversity and inclusion. I've spent 15 years in that field. So we've shifted things around. I now have a chief operating officer who's just a total crackpot. She's amazing at what she does. And I just said, you run the business. I'm going to deliver. I'm going to get back to doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And it makes the clients happy. It lends to credibility. And I think what my advice to consultants would be to do just that. Get other people to run your business, to handle the operational stuff, which you may not be good at anyway. Outsource it, hire people, whatever, so that you can do what you're exactly good at.
And how do you approach deciding which engagements or which clients to get involved on the delivery? Because I'm assuming that you're not involved with every client project and delivering on everything. So how do you think about your time, which is obviously limited? It's your most valuable resource as it is for everybody. But for you, with your expertise that you're bringing to this, is it only certain priced engagements? Is it only your kind of biggest clients? How do you think about making the decision of where to get involved and what, where and what not to get involved in?
Yeah, it comes back to your previous question, which I didn't entirely answer. Is one of the things that we have done is elevated people on the team to make sure that the clients perceive them as the subject matter expert. Yeah. And that involved, first of all, their training, making sure that they had the skills to do the job. It also involved, getting them to write a thought leadership piece, putting them on social media, leading, getting them front and center in front of the clients to show what they could do. And now the way I approach what the work I do, it's really about where my skill set suits best. So, I have a heavy data background. So our data collection, census work, it's a good place for me to go. I'm a writer, so I do a lot of our communications work. I am a facilitator, so I will facilitate instructor-led training, but only for senior executive audiences.
Right.
So it's being a bit selective about where I go, but also, like strategy work, it's just not my thing. It's not my jam. So I let Deanna Metzenke, who's my chief client officer, she leads our strategy piece, and she's really good at it. And sometimes clients will say, "Oh, we really want Michael to lead this strategy discussion," and I'll go and do it. Mm-hmm. Largely with Deanna to say, I'm just going to vouch for her. I'm going to be like, yeah, she's really better at this. I'm here to be very attractive and charming, but, we're going to let her do her thing.
Right.
And once I do that, I find the clients are fine with it. I just have to sort of, anoint a person and say, this person knows what they're doing, and let them do their job. And then it works out well.
Yeah. And it's so often what holds us back is not the external factors, but our own mindset and how we think about things.
Totally.
So in talking about the sales and getting out there, making offers, doing additional work with existing clients, I wanted to ask you about how people perceive your service offerings and the work that you do, and kind of what is the reception like? Because I would imagine that for some companies and potential clients out there, the idea of diversity, inclusion, like this would be top of mind, right? It resonates with them. They're actively looking for help in this area or guidance or advice in this area. But for others, I would imagine that they're not even thinking about it. It's not even on their radar. How do you and how does the company think about that in terms of identifying who to focus on and who would be more likely to be receptive to these offerings? And is there anything that you found that is helpful in dealing with organizations that may not necessarily be thinking about this very actively, but that it could be of benefit to them? So kind of educating them or getting them to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if it's not something that is top of mind for them.
Yeah, we have a very big advantage in the market right now, and that is that the conversation around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility is front and center. Whether it's our government, whether it's the media, people are talking about it. And so that has meant that we haven't had to do a really hard sell to say, here's what you need to be doing. So that has worked in our favor. I'm not going to lie. The way we have, or our plan, I guess, to now proactively target the market for clients that we haven't done business with is largely on LinkedIn. We'll look at LinkedIn and say, who has diversity in their title?
Right.
And if somebody's got the word diversity in their title, there's a pretty good chance that they're focused on this work in some way, shape, or form. And it's actually how we grew the business at the very beginning. I spent a whole lot of time on LinkedIn connecting with people that had the word diversity or inclusion in their title, and then just starting to talk to them about what we were envisioning as an organization, and it grew from there. A lot of it was my own contacts that a friend of mine was the head of diversity for HSBC. So I picked up the phone and called him and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? He said yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there were also a lot that we had to do some outreach. I would say that if you're trying to reach out to clients, figure out your way in. Who's the best person to talk to? If you're an IT consultant, it's somebody with IT in their title. Calling the CEO is not the answer. I get calls from IT providers all the time. I have a chief digital officer. He's the person you call. You don't call me.
Right.
Find the right in. I would also say one of the best ways is around those free educational opportunities, the webinars where you're giving away information, but it's a way of positioning yourself as that subject matter expert and raising awareness of who you are. And that's one thing that we've done very well in the past and continue to do is, okay, we're going to do a webinar on cultural competence. We're going to do a webinar on land acknowledgements. And they're free to attend. But again, we get your contact information, right, and our name is attached to that topic for you, which ultimately, when they're looking to hire a consultant to do something, they come back to that.
Do you find that senior executives who obviously are very time stretched are excited about coming on webinars and spending an hour or so on kind of a medium like that? Or is there a more effective way that you found to really engage and educate senior decision makers?
Oh, that's the $64,000 question. I think some are, absolutely. We get CEOs, we get CFOs coming on our webinars, and some are not.
Right.
You can't rely on one means to get things out. I mean, this comes back to the comment about email. Yes, it's part of it,
sure,
but
yeah,
it's not the entire thing. It's not
right,
only email. You have to have multiple avenues for that outreach. So doing webinars, coming up with thought leadership pieces, being on social media, tweeting. Every day you should be tweeting about something. And slowly but surely, each of those channels will grow for you and start to bring in business.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Michael, I mean, do you find, many of the companies that you've mentioned who are clients or founding partners and supporters of the nonprofit or clients of the for-profit consultancy, there are large, well-known organizations. You mentioned that there are now smaller ones that may have up to 50 team members that are also joining and becoming part of the nonprofit. Is diversity inclusion, is this something that is really only, and this is a bit of a, I think the answer will be pretty clear. I guess my real question is, at what point does this become important for a company, for an entrepreneur, for a founder to be thinking about? Is it only when you have X number of employees? Is it something when you're even a solo consultant you should be thinking about? Just what is your guidance on this topic? Because as you said, it is everywhere these days, and it's really become front and center. So how should a small consulting firm or even an independent solo consultant be thinking about this topic of diversity inclusion, both within their own business and within their clients' businesses?
Well, I think you start thinking about it on day one. When you're one employee, when you're a solo entrepreneur, I always say there's three areas you need to focus on. One's your people, who you hire, who you fire, who you retain, who you promote. And what are their needs? Number two is your clients. Who are they? What are their needs? And third is your brand. How are you known?
Right.
And that's not about your logo. That's about how you're known as an employer and as a service provider. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a small consulting shop and you have not been paying attention to diversity and inclusion. And you go in to do a pitch for a client and the client doesn't hire you. And this happened to one of my clients. This was a big consulting shop. They went in to do a pitch and it was worth millions of dollars and they lost the work. And in the debrief, they said, "Did you not look up our team?" And the team was predominantly women and the consultant had sent in all men, all white men. And it isn't to say you should be tokenistic, but the way our brains work, we tend to attract, and this is the whole unconscious bias spiel, we tend to attract people who are like us.
Right.
So we are drawn to hire people who will challenge us the least. And if you're not thinking about diversity, you can end up with 5 employees, all of them look like you.
Right.
But then you don't understand the differences, because of course if you're if you're not a person of color, if you're not an indigenous person, a person who lives with a disability, you don't know what their lives are like. Mm-hmm. You don't know what their needs are. So small shops, solopreneurs need to be thinking about this very early on. And that's not to say that straight, white, able-bodied men are a endangered species, or that you should be ashamed of being who you are. Mm-hmm. But are you thinking about who you're hiring? Are you thinking about the needs of your client through that lens? Because statistically, in Canada, straight, white, able-bodied men make up about 30% of the workforce. In the US, it's about 20%. Mm-hmm. So you're not hiring the best and the brightest if your entire team is straight, white, able-bodied men. Statistically, it's just impossible.
Right.
So do you have, I always say this, do you have a staff that is reflective of the clients that you want to serve? Mm-hmm. And so in these organized, small consulting firms, large entrepreneurs, they need to be thinking about who they're hiring. They need to be thinking about how they're presenting themselves to clients. They need to be thinking about the diversity of their clients. If you're dealing with a client from, let's say, Japan, there are specifically different cultural norms of how to do business in Japan than in North America.
Completely, yeah.
If you don't know that, you are going to stick your foot in it very quickly.
I saw it firsthand. I mean, I've lived in Japan 5-6 years, had a business over there, and you're so right that the typical North American approach, if you try and bring that into a place like Japan, you're just going to make so many mistakes. It's
totally
really understanding the culture and the nuances and how to listen and watch a lot more than just try and speak. And there's so many things that are critical from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it's as simple as like how you present your business card, mm-hmm. and how you receive a person's business card. In North American context, we take it, we jam it in our pocket, and we look at it later. But in Japan, you present it with honor, mm-hmm. and you receive it in the same way. Mm-hmm. You can destroy a business relationship by putting someone's business card in your pocket too quickly. Mm-hmm. If you don't know that, if you are not thinking about diversity and inclusion, you stand to lose business.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the tokenistic, I got to hire a person of color. That's not it. It's about the impact that has on your business, and you need to look at it through that lens. This is not about social justice. It's not about us saving the world. It's about what's good for your business.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful message, and I really appreciate you sharing that. What would be a good starting point for people, for the business owner, whether they have a team or it's just themselves, to begin thinking more about this? I know, you have your book, Birds of All Feathers.
I was going to say, read my book.
There it is, right? So that's a good point, and we'll definitely link that up and make sure that people can access that as a resource. But is there a framework, or are there certain questions, or is it as simple as just starting to consider some of the things that you mentioned about, who do you want to hire and who do you want to work with and who are they and what are their needs? Or is there something else that you would encourage people to begin thinking through?
So there's a number of things. I mean, and all joking aside, the book contains a bit of a roadmap. That is, when I wrote the book, I was specifically thinking about, small business,
right? Because
they don't have an HR person, or if they do, they have one person who's responsible for everything. And for a lot of people, this is a bit of a confusing world. It's simple. What's your business case? What's the problem? So doing a bit of an assessment. And it doesn't need to be complicated. What's the problem we're trying to solve for? Then what's the strategy? How are we going to solve the problem? And then measure it. How are you going to measure? What's success look like? And then rinse and repeat. It's really not that complicated. Mm-hmm. But reading is one thing. Doing is more important. Look at different actions, have conversations. What can you do differently? Mm-hmm. Also, raise some awareness of your own, like do some education for yourself to understand that you don't know it all.
Right.
And there's a lot of learning to be done around this topic. So, and I think that comes with a lot of humility, which is really important. Mm-hmm. That you're learning about other people's lived experiences and how you can make yours an organization where they'll feel comfortable and welcome.
Yeah.
Just do something. Sitting around, I promise you, it's like going to the gym. Just because you have a gym membership doesn't mean anything's going to happen. I can speak from experience. If you do nothing, nothing will happen. So do something and start the ship moving in the right direction.
Michael, before we wrap up, a couple other quick questions for you. You're involved with this nonprofit that you founded. You have a consulting business with almost 50 people. I would imagine that your day is quite busy. When you look at your performance, your productivity, the success that you've created in life and in business, what do you feel are one or two things that really contribute to that? Is there a habit or a practice that you're doing on a daily or regular basis that you think really creates the impact or the positive performance you're able to have?
A big one would be self-care.
What does that mean to you?
Doing what I need to do to make sure that I'm not burning myself out.
Can you be a bit more specific? Like, is that gym or holidays or massages or meditation?
All of the above. Yeah. So it's I make sure I take my vacation every year. And I lead by example with my team by making sure they know that I'm on vacation and I'm unavailable.
Right.
I've always said that, the only reason to call me is if the building is on fire. And if the building is on fire, my instruction is going to be leave the building. There's nothing that can't wait until I'm back from vacation. Making sure that, weekends, I try not to work on the weekends. They're a bit sacred, so I can spend time with my family, so I can do things that I enjoy that have nothing to do with my work. Making sure that I'm taking care of my mental health, that I am going to the gym, that I am, I go for a walk with my dogs every morning for about an hour. And that's how I start my day. Not this morning because there was 40 feet of snow, but I start my day like that, and it really gives me that fresh outlook. It's really important to know what works best for you. I can't define it for everybody. Sure. You should have a hobby, have something you do outside of work, see friends, because particularly when you're running your own company, it can become all encompassing. And there was a point when I was working 60 hours a week and I was, in the office on Christmas Day and doing all sorts of things to really get the business where I wanted it to be. And I had to step back and say, oh, hold on a second. I'm burning the candle at both ends and we're running out of wick here. I think taking care of yourself is really important. The other piece is be willing to let go. And that means trusting people that you hire to do the job you hire them to do. And I had a bit of a lesson on this with my IT manager, now my chief digital officer. He's been with us for 8 years or something like that. Because of my background in IT, I was always sticking my nose into his business. And it'd be something simple, right? Like, oh, I need you to create this mailbox. Oh, no, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll do it.
Right.
Take me a few seconds. But I needed to give him the autonomy. I hired him for a reason. I needed to give him the opportunity to do that job. And it was very freeing once I was able to let go of that and say, okay, I know that piece of work is taken care of entirely.
Right.
It's important to let go and not micromanage, not be on top of people. You don't hire people to be robots. Let them be creative. Let them make suggestions. Let them innovate. You will be better as a business owner for that. I think those two things are probably my lead, like always front of mind for me, in running the business to make sure that I'm doing the best I can.
All right, and then second to last question, over the last 6-12 months, what's your favorite or just really sticks with you, a book that you've read or listened to? Could be fiction or nonfiction.
Ooh, so after George Floyd's death in May of 2020, 2020, I did a lot of reading on specifically anti-Black racism. And so it's things like How to Be an Anti-Racist, White Fragility is another one. Been very much into that line of book, which I know, I mean, it's this is what I do for a living, so I'm kind of entrenched in it. Those are the books that I have been really focused on, and getting a lot of building a lot of awareness. You know, one thing about doing this work, diversity and inclusion, you have to have an open mind. There is not a point where I have all the knowledge. And so reading books by, you know, Ibram X. Kendi or Brene Brown have really helped me to step back and learn something new, and change my own perspective about how I act in certain situations. And of late, of course, I have been knee-deep in my new book that's coming out in a couple of months. So I have been reading that over and over and over again.
Do you want to give a quick plug or a little bit of information about the upcoming book, just so that people can look forward to it?
Sure. I'll move my head. So it's called Alphabet Soup, The Essential Guide to LGBTQ2+ Inclusion at Work. It's coming out March 29th, and it is available for pre-order right now. But it is sort of taking the work from Birds of All Feathers and adapting it specifically around sexuality and gender. So how can employers be more inclusive of people from the LGBTQ2+ communities? It is a bit of a how-to guide, very, it's almost simplistic. Like, I'm not an academic. It is not Tolstoy, either of my books. I try to keep them light. I try to use humor. Some will not call it humor, but I go for humor. And this book in particular, Alphabet Soup, really dives into a world that for a lot of people, particularly those who are straight and cisgender, is very confusing, and hopefully will help clear up some misconceptions.
Michael, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing some really great perspectives and ideas that I think will add a lot of value for people, and certainly worth considering and looking how you can implement or improve your business, your life, your relationships from this. I want to make sure that people can also learn more about you, your books, your work, the nonprofit, the for-profit consultancy. Is there one website, or like where should we direct people that they could go and just learn more about all that?
Unfortunately, there isn't one website. For me, you can go to michaelbach.com, find out all things Michael Bach, including my social media handles. For the charity, CCDI, you can go to ccdi.ca. And for the consulting, CCDI Consulting, you guessed it, ccdiconsulting.ca.
There we go. All right, we'll try and link all that up in the show notes. Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.